Dear Mama, they laughed at us. Said colored men couldn't fly, couldn't fight, couldn't be trusted with machines more complex than a mop or a plow. Said our brains weren't wired right for aerial combat, that we'd panic under fire, that giving us fighter planes was like giving children loaded guns. I heard it all during training at Tuskegee, heard it whispered behind closed doors and sometimes shouted to our faces, heard it in the way white officers looked through us instead of at us, heard it in every regulation that kept us separate, every rule that said we weren't good enough to fly beside white pilots even though we were good enough to die for the same country. But Mama, I just came back from a mission over Berlin, came back with 2 kills and a damaged engine and every bomber in our group intact, and those same men who laughed aren't laughing anymore. They're asking for us by name now, asking specifically for the Red Tails to escort their missions because they know, everyone knows, that when the Tuskegee Airmen are flying cover, you're coming home alive. I'm writing this in the squadron ready room at Ramatelli, still in my flight suit, hands still shaking a little from adrenaline and the cold at 25,000 feet. My P-51 Mustang, she's called Sarah's Pride, after you, Mama, painted right under the canopy where everyone can see. She's outside getting patched up by the ground crew, bullet holes in the tail section, and a chunk missing from the left wing, courtesy of a German Focke-Wulf that got closer than I would have liked. But we made it back, both of us, and the B-24 Liberator we were escorting made it back too. All 10 men aboard safe because we were there, because the Red Tails never leave a bomber unprotected, because we've got something to prove that goes beyond military duty or following orders. We hit our 100th confirmed kill today, Mama. 100 German aircraft shot down by the 332nd Fighter Group, by colored pilots who weren't supposed to be capable of this kind of combat, by men who had to fight for the right to fight, who had to prove ourselves worthy of dying for a country that won't even let us use the same water fountains as white folks back home. 100 victories, and not a single bomber lost under our escort in over 200 missions. Not one. The white bomber crews know it, request us specifically, paint their planes to match our red tails because they want everyone to know they're flying with the best. That's what we've become, Mama. Not just good pilots, not just adequate, but the best. And we did it by being twice as skilled, twice as disciplined, twice as brave as anyone else up there, because that's what it takes when you're carrying the weight of an entire race's dignity on your wings. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if you had a relative who served in the air or believed in something bigger than themselves. Every story shared keeps their courage alive in the clouds. Because what we're doing up here matters beyond just this war, beyond just shooting down German planes and protecting American bombers. We're proving something that shouldn't need proving, that courage and skill and honor aren't determined by the color of a man's skin, that the sky doesn't care if you're black or white, that when you're at 20,000 feet and enemy fighters are diving on you, the only thing that matters is whether you can fly and fight and bring yourself and your brothers home alive. My name is Elias J. A flight officer in the United States Army Air Forces, 382nd Fighter Group, 100th Fighter Squadron, the Red Tails, they call us, after the distinctive red paint on our P-51 Mustang tail sections that let bombers know their guardian angels have arrived. I'm 24 years old, from Montgomery, Alabama, and before the war, I was a student at Tuskegee Institute studying mechanical engineering, with dreams of designing aircraft instead of flying them. But then Pearl Harbor happened, and then I heard about the Army Air Corps opening a training program for Negro pilots at Tuskegee, and I knew with the kind of certainty that settles in your bones and won't let go, that I had to be part of it, had to prove that colored men could fly, had to honor Papa's memory by succeeding where he'd been denied the chance. You remember Papa, Mama? Of course you remember him. He's been gone 10 years now, but I still see him in every reflection, still hear his voice in quiet moments, telling me that being a colored man in America means working twice as hard for half the credit, that the world will try to keep me down, but I have to keep rising anyway. Papa served in the Great War, served in a segregated labor battalion unloading ships and digging trenches while white soldiers got to be heroes. Came home with a medal he kept in a drawer, and a bitterness he tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. He never got to fly, Never got to do anything except backbreaking labor for officers who treated him like he was less than human. And I think that killed him more surely than the tuberculosis that finally took him in 35. But before he died, Papa gave me something precious, Mama. You remember that wooden toy airplane he carved, the one I used to carry everywhere, pretending I was soaring above Alabama and all its ugliness? I still have it, keep it in my footlocker, and before every mission I touch it once for luck and remembrance. Papa made that toy because he wanted me to dream bigger than Montgomery would let me dream. Wanted me to look at the sky and see possibility instead of limits. Son, he told me one afternoon when I was maybe 8 or 9, lying in the grass, watching clouds drift by. You see those birds up there? They don't care what color you are. The sky don't care. You remember that. I remember, Papa. I remember. And I'm living the dream you never got to live, flying the planes you only got to watch from the ground while you unloaded cargo for men who didn't respect you. Every time I climb into my Mustang's cockpit, every time I push the throttle forward and feel 1,600 horses of Rolls-Royce Merlin engine lift me off the runway, every time I climb through clouds into that perfect blue emptiness where the only things that matter are altitude and airspeed and keeping your wingman safe, every time I do that, I'm flying for both of us, Papa. For you and for every colored man who was told he couldn't, who was kept down, who died without ever getting the chance to prove what he was capable of. And Mama, I'm flying for you too. For the woman who worked herself to exhaustion cleaning white folks' houses so I could afford books and tuition, who never complained about the weight of laundry baskets or the ache in her back or the casual cruelty of employers who treated her like furniture. I'm flying for every evening you came home too tired to eat, but you made dinner anyway. For every Sunday you got us both dressed in our best clothes and took me to church, where Reverend Williams would preach about Moses leading his people to freedom. And I'd think about you leading me towards something better than Montgomery had planned for us. I keep your photograph in my flight suit, Mama, right over my heart where it's protected by leather and determination. That picture from 1928, where you're wearing your white Sunday dress and standing in front of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, looking so young and hopeful and beautiful. The edges are worn from me touching it before every mission, and there's a crease down the middle from where I folded it to fit in my pocket, but your smile is still there, still giving me strength when I need it most. I look at that picture and I remember why I'm fighting. Not just to win a war, not just to prove colored men can fly, but to make you proud, to give you something to tell your grandchildren someday, to earn the faith you've always had in me, even when I didn't have faith in myself. Getting into the pilot training program wasn't easy, Mama. I know you remember those months in 42 when I was taking tests and filling out applications and trying to meet requirements that seemed designed specifically to keep colored men out. The Army wanted college education. Check. I had 2 years at Tuskegee Institute. They wanted clean records. Check. I'd never been in trouble with the law despite plenty of provocation from white folks who thought a colored man studying engineering was above his station. They wanted physical fitness. Check. Years of working construction during summers to help pay for school had given me strength and endurance. They wanted most of all proof that we wouldn't embarrass them, wouldn't fail spectacularly and prove all the racists right about colored men being mentally inferior. We had to be perfect, Mama. Not good, not adequate, but perfect. A white cadet could make mistakes, could wash out of training, and it was just one individual failing. But if a colored cadet failed, it was proof that the whole race was unfit for aviation. That's the weight we carried even before we started flying. The knowledge that we represented 13 million colored Americans, that our success or failure would determine whether future generations got the same opportunities, that every landing had to be smooth, every maneuver had to be textbook, every test score had to be excellent, because anything less would be used as evidence that the program should be shut down. I reported to Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama in June of 42, one of maybe 40 cadets in my class. The base was segregated naturally, colored cadets, colored instructors, colored support staff. All of us kept carefully separate from the white world outside the fence. But inside that fence, Mama, we were building something extraordinary. We were learning to fly military aircraft, learning aerial combat, learning navigation and gunnery and formation flying, all the skills that would make us fighter pilots. And we were doing it under the eyes of men who wanted us to fail, who expected us to fail, who had bet money and reputations on the idea that colored men couldn't handle the stress and complexity of aerial combat. We proved them wrong, Mama. Every single day we proved them wrong. When they said we couldn't handle the academics, we studied until our eyes burned and we could recite engine specifications and flight theory in our sleep. When they said we couldn't handle the physical demands, we ran extra miles and did extra calisthenics until our bodies were as hard as the steel of our aircraft. When they said we'd panic under pressure, we flew our training missions with ice-cold precision, executing maneuvers that would make experienced pilots nervous, pushing our planes and ourselves to the limits and beyond. I'll never forget my first solo flight, Mama. February of '43, clear, cold morning, frost still on the grass around the runway. My instructor, Captain Davis, colored officer who'd been flying since before the war, he climbed out of the rear cockpit of our PT-17 trainer and said, "She's all yours, Cadet Johnson. Take her up, do your pattern, bring her back in one piece. And remember, you're not just flying for yourself. You're flying for everyone who looks like us." No pressure there, right? But I did it, Mama. Climbed into that front seat, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my chest, hands sweating despite the cold, and I went through my checklist like Captain Davis had taught me. Fuel, magnetos, prop pitch, trim tabs, all of it mechanical and familiar despite my nerves. I pushed the throttle forward, felt the steerman's radial engine roar to life, felt the tail come up as I gained speed, felt that magical moment when the wheels left the ground, and suddenly I wasn't earthbound anymore, wasn't limited by gravity or Jim Crow or any of the rules that said colored men should know their place. I was flying, Mama. Really flying, alone in the sky with nothing but air and engine and the knowledge that I was doing something Papa never got to do, something you dreamed I'd do since I was a boy with a wooden toy airplane. I flew the pattern perfectly, took off, climbed to altitude, made my turns, brought her back around and landed smooth as silk. Captain Davis was grinning when I taxied back, actually grinning, and he said, "Welcome to the fraternity, Johnson. You're a pilot now." And in that moment, Mama, I knew I'd found my calling, knew I was meant to be up there in the sky where the air is thin and cold and pure, where the only color that matters is the blue above and the green below and the red on my tail that tells everyone I'm a Tuskegee Airman. I need to tell you about my brothers, Mama, the men I fly with, the pilots who've become closer to me than family because we share something deeper than blood. We share the sky, share the mission, share the knowledge that we're making history with every sortie we fly. These men are the finest pilots I've ever known, the kind of aviators who could fly for any air force in the world if only the world would let them, and I'm honored to call them friends and wingmen and brothers. Lieutenant C.B. is from Chicago, trained in the class right before mine, and he's got more confirmed kills than anyone else in the squadron. 7 German fighters shot down, each one a testament to his skill and nerve. CB's got a gift for aerial combat, can see an enemy formation before anyone else spots them, can predict what they'll do, and position himself perfectly to exploit their mistakes. "We're making history, Eli," he says after every successful mission, grinning that huge grin of his that makes you forget you're in a war zone and remember that we're living the dream, doing what they said we couldn't do, writing our names in the sky where everyone can see them. CB taught me a lot about combat flying, about the difference between training and reality, about how to manage fear and use it to sharpen your reflexes instead of paralyzing them. "Fear's good," he told me after my first encounter with German fighters, after I'd landed shaking so hard I could barely climb out of my cockpit. "Fear means you're alive, means you understand what's at stake. The pilots who don't feel fear are the ones who die stupid, taking unnecessary risks because they think they're invincible. Feel the fear, Eli. Let it make you careful, then use your training to make you deadly." Then there's Sergeant R.T. To our chief mechanic, the man who keeps our Mustangs flying despite equipment shortages, and the kind of neglect that colored units always suffer when resources are distributed. RT's from Louisiana, maybe 50 years old, been working on engines since before I was born, and he treats our aircraft like they're his children. Every plane that goes up, he says, that's a son leaving home, and every plane that comes back, that's a son coming home safe. You boys do your job up there. I'll make sure these birds are ready to bring you back. RT works miracles, Mama. We're supposed to get replacement parts when our planes are damaged, but colored units are always last priority, so RT improvises, fabricates, trades favors with supply sergeants, does whatever it takes to keep us flying. I've seen him rebuild an engine using parts from 3 different wrecks, seen him straighten a bent propeller blade using nothing but a hammer and his experienced eye, seen him work through the night to patch bullet holes and repair hydraulic lines so we can fly the next morning's mission. We owe our lives to RT and the other mechanics who keep our red-tailed Mustangs airworthy despite everything working against them. These men are my family now, Mama. The pilots I fly with, the ground crew who maintain our aircraft, the intelligence officers who brief our missions, the cooks who make sure we eat before we go up and after we come back, all of us bound together by shared purpose and shared struggle, all of us proving every day that colored men can excel at anything if given the chance, all of us writing a new chapter in American history, with our courage and skill and determination. This morning's mission briefing started at 0500 hours, Mama, all of us gathered in the ready room, while Captain Ross pointed at maps showing our route from Ramitelli to Berlin and back, 700 miles each way through skies full of German fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The target was a rail yard outside Berlin, critical junction for German supply lines, and our job was to escort a formation of B-24 Liberators to the target, protect them while they dropped their bombs, and bring them all home safe. Standard mission, routine even, except no mission is ever routine when you're flying into the heart of Nazi Germany and every flak battery and fighter squadron between here and there wants to kill you. Expect heavy resistance, Captain Ross said, and I could see the tension in the bomber crews who'd flown up from their base to coordinate with us. Intelligence reports significant Luftwaffe fighter presence in the Berlin area, Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, experienced pilots, well armed. They know we're coming. They'll be waiting for us. He paused, looked around the room at our faces, and then he said something that made my chest tight with pride. The bombers requested you specifically, asked for the red tails by name because they know you'll bring them home. Don't let them down. We suited up, leather flight jackets over wool uniforms, Mae West life preservers, parachute harnesses, leather helmets, oxygen masks, all the gear that turns a pilot into something halfway between man and machine. I checked my pockets. Your photograph over my heart, Papa's wooden airplane wrapped in cloth, the lucky silver dollar I've carried since training. Superstition, maybe, but when you're about to fly into combat at 5 miles high where the temperature is 40 below zero and men are actively trying to kill you, you take all the luck you can get. The walk to the aircraft line was quiet, just the sound of boots on concrete and the distant rumble of engines warming up. My Mustang, Sarah's pride, your name painted in white letters under the canopy, was waiting, red tail gleaming in the early morning light, ground crew making last-minute checks. RT was there, handed me a rag to wipe a smudge off the canopy, said, "Bring her back in one piece, Lieutenant. She's a good bird." I promised I would, climbed the wing, settled into the cockpit that had become more familiar than any chair I'd ever sat in, and started my pre-flight checklist. The Merlin engine caught with a roar, 12 cylinders of British engineering producing 1,600 horsepower that I could feel through the stick and rudder pedals that made the whole airframe vibrate with barely contained power. I taxied into position, ran through my final checks, magnetos, fuel pressure, oil temperature, coolant, prop pitch, everything green, everything ready. Tower clearance came through my headset. Red tail flight. You are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed, gentlemen. And then I was rolling, gaining speed, tail coming up, and at 80 miles per hour I pulled back on the stick, and Sarah's pride leaped into the air like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. We formed up over the airfield. 16 Mustangs with red tails, 4 flights of 4 aircraft each, Every pilot knowing his position, every wingman covering his leader, the kind of tight professional formation that comes from hundreds of hours of training and dozens of missions flown together. Then we climbed, heading northeast toward our rendezvous with the bombers, climbing through clouds and cold air until we leveled off at 23,000 feet, where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and the world below is just a patchwork of fields and forests and rivers that seem too beautiful to be part of a continent tearing itself apart in war. We met the bombers over the Adriatic, 18 B-24 Liberators in tight formation, each one carrying 10 men and 6,000 pounds of bombs, each one depending on us to keep them safe from the German fighters that would try to shoot them down before they could complete their mission. The bomber crews saw our red tails, and I heard relief in their radio calls. Red tails are on station. We're going to make it, boys. That's what we'd earned, Mama. Trust, respect, the knowledge that bomber crews felt safer with us than with anyone else because we'd never lost a single aircraft under our escort, never abandoned a bomber to chase glory or personal kill counts, never put our own advancement ahead of our mission to protect. The flight to Berlin took 2 hours, 2 hours of watching the ground scroll by below, of scanning the sky for enemy fighters, of listening to radio chatter and trying to stay alert despite the cold and the noise and the hypnotic drone of the engine. Germany passed beneath us, farms and villages and cities already scarred by years of bombing, anti-aircraft batteries that sent up black puffs of flak that bloomed like deadly flowers and dissipated on the wind. We flew through it all, maintaining formation, keeping station on the bombers, every pilot watching his assigned sector of sky and his wingman 6 o'clock, the kind of disciplined flying that had become second nature after months of combat. The German fighters hit us 50 miles from Berlin, came diving out of the sun the way they always do, a full squadron of Messerschmitt 109s trying to break through our formation to get at the bombers. I saw them first, caught the glint of sunlight off canopies, saw the gray-green camouflage against the blue sky, counted at least 12 bogies and probably more behind them. "Bandits! Bandits at 3 o'clock high!" I called it over the radio, and immediately my training took over. Years of practice translating into action without conscious thought. I pulled into a hard climbing turn, felt the G-forces press me into my seat, felt Sarah's pride respond like she was part of me, an extension of my will rather than a machine I was controlling. The Messerschmitts came screaming past, guns blazing, tracer rounds drawing bright lines through the air where we'd been seconds before. I rolled inverted, pulled through into a dive, came out behind one of the 109s and squeezed my trigger, felt my 650 caliber machine guns hammer out their deadly message, saw my tracers walking up the German's fuselage until they found his engine, and suddenly there was smoke and flame, and the enemy fighter was spinning earthward, trailing fire. "One down," I reported, voice calm despite my hammering heart, despite the adrenaline flooding my system, despite the pure primal satisfaction of having outflown and outshot an enemy pilot who'd probably been flying since before I soloed. But there was no time to celebrate, no time to watch my kill spiral into the ground, because there were more German fighters, and they were pressing their attack, trying desperately to get through us to the bombers, and our job wasn't to rack up kills, but to keep those B-24s safe. The dogfight spread across 20 miles of sky, Mama, aircraft twisting and turning in 3 dimensions, guns chattering, pilots calling out positions and threats and victories. CB. Got 2, I heard him whoop over the radio as his second kill went down. Another red-tail pilot got 1. The Germans were good, experienced, aggressive, flying excellent aircraft. But we were better. Better trained, better disciplined, better motivated, because we were fighting not just for our country, but for our dignity, for the right to be treated as equals, for the chance to prove that colored men could excel at the most demanding form of combat ever devised. I engaged a Focke-Wulf 190, one of Germany's best fighters, flown by a pilot who clearly knew what he was doing. We circled each other, both trying for position, both trying to get on the other's tail where guns could be brought to bear. It was like a deadly dance, Mama, a test of skill and nerve and aircraft performance, each of us exploiting every advantage we could find. The Mustang could turn tighter, the Focke-Wulf could climb faster. I used my turn radius, kept him from getting behind me, gradually worked my way into position. He tried to dive away, but I followed, pushed my throttle to the firewall, felt the Merlin's supercharger kick in as I dove through 20,000 feet, 18, 16, gaining on him, closing the distance. At 500 yards, I opened fire, short controlled bursts the way they'd taught us at Tuskegee, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. My first burst missed, he jinked hard left, and my rounds went wide. Second burst caught his wing, blew chunks out of his aileron. Third burst found his cockpit, and suddenly the Focke-Wulf was rolling uncontrolled, pilot either dead or incapacitated, aircraft plummeting toward the German countryside below. I didn't watch him hit. Didn't need to. Pulled up, checked my 6, scanned the sky for threats, and rejoined the formation. The bombers made their run, dropped their ordnance on the rail yard, turned for home with us still flying cover. The Germans made one more pass, less coordinated now, their numbers thinned by our guns, their enthusiasm dampened by the realization that we weren't going to let them through. We drove them off, stayed with the bombers all the way back to Italian airspace, landed at Ramitelli with every bomber accounted for, every red-tail pilot safe except for one of our brothers who'd taken hits and radioed that he was going down, who'd said the words I'll never forget, "Tell Mama I made it high." His name was Lieutenant Marcus W. Mama from Detroit, 22 years old, married with a baby girl he'd never met, because she was born after he deployed. Marcus flew my wing sometimes, good pilot, steady, the kind of man you wanted watching your back because you knew he'd never leave you, never abandon his responsibilities, never put himself ahead of the mission. He took cannon fire from a Messerschmitt during the dogfight over Berlin, took hits in his engine and his fuel system, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't keep his Mustang flying. I heard him on the radio, heard the calm in his voice despite what must have been absolute terror. Heard him say that he was losing altitude, that his engine was failing, that he wasn't going to make it back to base. "I'm punching out," he said, and I heard the canopy jettison, heard the wind noise as he bailed out over Germany, enemy territory where a colored pilot could expect no mercy, where he'd either be captured or killed, and either way his war was over. His last transmission was that message, "Tell Mama I made it high," and then silence, just empty radio static where his voice had been. We fly for him now, Mama. We fly for Marcus and for every other red-tail who didn't make it home, who gave everything including their lives to prove that colored men could fly and fight and die just as bravely as any white pilot. We fly because our survival honors their sacrifice, because every mission we complete successfully, every bomber we bring home safe, every German fighter we shoot down, adds to the legacy they started building, the proof that character and courage aren't determined by skin color, but by the content of a man's heart and the strength of his determination. Marcus made it high, Mama. He made it to 25,000 feet where the air is thin and cold and the sky is so blue it looks like heaven. He made it into combat against the Luftwaffe and acquitted himself with honor. He made it into the history books as one of the Tuskegee Airmen who changed American aviation forever. And someday, when this war is over and men like him finally get the recognition they deserve, his name will be remembered alongside all the others who proved that the only ceiling that should limit colored men is the one imposed by clouds and atmosphere, not the one imposed by prejudice and hate. I know you worry, Mama. I know every time you hear an airplane engine overhead you wonder if it's me. Every time there's a knock on the door you fear it's a telegram saying I'm not coming home. Every night you pray that your son will survive this war and come back to Montgomery and the life you sacrificed so much to give him. I worry too. Worry that I'll make a mistake, that my luck will run out, that one day a German pilot will be just a little faster or a little better, and I won't see the sunset over Ramitelli, or write another letter, or feel your arms around me when I finally come home. But Mama, I need you to understand something. What we're doing here matters beyond just winning the war, beyond just defeating Germany and Japan and making the world safe from fascism. We're fighting a second war, a war against the prejudice and discrimination that have kept colored Americans down since slavery ended and Jim Crow began. Every mission we fly successfully, every bomber we escort safely, every German fighter we shoot down, each one is a blow against the idea that colored men are inferior, that we're not capable of excellence, that the color of our skin determines the content of our character. The white bomber crews know it. They used to be skeptical when we first started flying escort, used to doubt whether colored pilots could really protect them, used to request white fighter groups whenever possible. But now they ask for us specifically, paint their aircraft to match our red tails, trust us with their lives because we've proven ourselves again and again. And when they go home after the war, Mama, they'll tell their children and grandchildren about the red tails, about the colored pilots who saved their lives, about the Tuskegee Airmen who were the best fighter escort in the entire European theater. That story will spread, Mama. It'll spread through the military first, then to the civilian world, and slowly, maybe too slowly, but inevitably, it'll change minds and hearts and laws. Men who flew with us will go back to Kansas and Iowa and Oregon, and when they see colored folks being discriminated against, maybe some of them will remember the red tails and say, "That's not right. Those men are just as good as anyone." And maybe, just maybe, the next generation of colored children will grow up with opportunities we never had, with the chance to be pilots or engineers or doctors or whatever they dream of being, because we proved it was possible. That's why I fly, Mama. Not just for military victory, not just for personal glory or the thrill of aerial combat, but to open doors that have been closed to colored folks since this country was founded. Every time I climb into Sarah's Pride and take off into that beautiful blue sky, I'm carrying the hopes of 13 million colored Americans with me. Every time I outfly a German pilot or protect a bomber or bring my aircraft home despite damage and danger, I'm proving that we deserve equality, that we've earned respect, that the only thing holding colored folks back is the arbitrary cruelty of a system designed to keep us down. You told me once, Mama, when I was maybe 10 years old and crying because white boys had beaten me up for walking on their sidewalk, you told me that the sky doesn't see color, doesn't care whether the person looking up at it is black or white or any shade in between. God made the sky for everyone, you said, wiping my tears and holding me close. And someday, baby, you're going to fly up there where none of this ugliness can touch you, where the only thing that matters is how well you can spread your wings. I didn't believe you then, Mama. Thought you were just trying to make me feel better, trying to give me hope in a world that seemed designed to crush colored folks' dreams. But you were right. The sky doesn't care about Jim Crow or segregation or any of the artificial barriers that men create to keep other men down. At 25,000 feet, there are no colored sections or white sections, no back of the bus or separate water fountains. There's just altitude and airspeed and the laws of physics that apply equally to every pilot regardless of skin color. Up there, Mama, I'm not a colored man fighting in a white man's war. I'm not second class or inferior or any of the things that prejudice says I should be. I'm a fighter pilot, pure and simple, a man who's mastered one of the most difficult and dangerous professions in human history, a warrior who's proven his worth in the crucible of aerial combat. When I'm flying Sarah's Pride, when I'm maneuvering against German fighters or protecting bombers or navigating through clouds and weather, I'm just a pilot doing his job, and my only thought is to do that job better than anyone else can. That's the freedom I found in the sky, Mama. Not just freedom from gravity, but freedom from all the social constructs that try to limit what I can be and do. And I want that freedom for every colored person in America. Want every child who looks like us to know that they can achieve anything if they work hard enough and refuse to accept the limitations that society tries to impose. The red tails are proving that, mission by mission, kill by kill, bomber after bomber brought home safe because we were there protecting them. When this war ends, and it will end, Mama, maybe sooner than we think given how hard the Allies are pushing. When it ends, and I come home to Montgomery, things will still be hard. Jim Crow will still be law. Discrimination will still be reality. Colored folks will still have to fight for every scrap of dignity and opportunity. But something will have changed, something fundamental. We'll have proof, undeniable proof, that colored men can excel at anything they're given the chance to try. And that proof, those stories of the Tuskegee Airmen and the Red Tails, they'll be weapons in the fight for civil rights, evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away, a legacy we're building with every mission we fly. I want to tell you about the memorial service we held for Marcus W. and the 2 other Red Tail pilots we've lost this month. It wasn't official. The Army doesn't make much fuss over colored casualties, doesn't give us the same recognition that white units receive when they lose men. But we gathered anyway, all of us who could be spared from duty, standing in a circle on the hard stand where our aircraft are parked, our red-tailed Mustangs, silent witnesses to our grief. Captain Ross spoke first, talked about duty and sacrifice and how these men had given everything to prove that colored pilots deserved respect. Then CB spoke, his voice breaking as he remembered Marcus, remembered the time they'd flown together through a thunderstorm so violent it should have torn their aircraft apart, but they'd made it through by trusting each other, by flying formations so tight they might as well have been one plane instead of 2, RT. Spoke too, talked about how Marcus used to help him work on engines during his off hours, how he'd wanted to learn everything about aircraft so he could be a better pilot, how he'd left behind a wife and daughter who'd never know their husband and father except through stories and fading photographs. I couldn't speak, Mama. Stood there with tears running down my face, and no words adequate to express what I was feeling. Grief and rage and pride and guilt all mixed together in a knot I couldn't untangle. Grief for the men we'd lost, for the futures they'd never live, for the children who'd grow up without fathers. Rage at a system that sent colored men to die for a country that wouldn't even let them vote in some states, that treated them as second-class citizens while demanding first-class sacrifice. Pride in what we'd accomplished, in the legacy we were building despite everything working against us. And guilt, always guilt, that I'd survived when better men hadn't, that I got to write letters home while Marcus's wife got a telegram that would destroy her world. But then Chaplain Williams, colored officer, good man, been with us since training, he said something that helped. These men didn't die as victims, he said. They died as warriors, as pioneers, as proof that colored men can fly and fight with the best in the world. They died building a bridge for future generations, creating opportunities that didn't exist before. And we honor them not by mourning what they lost, but by continuing what they started, by flying every mission with the excellence they showed, by never giving the people who doubt us any reason to say we weren't worthy of the chance we've been given. So that's what we do, Mama. We fly for Marcus and all the others, carry their memory with us into combat, use their sacrifice as fuel for our determination. Every German fighter I shoot down, every bomber I protect, every mission I complete successfully. Those are all tributes to the men who didn't make it home, all ways of ensuring their deaths meant something, all contributions to the legacy they helped build. Today's second kill brought us to our 100th confirmed aerial victory, Mama. 100 German aircraft destroyed by the 332nd Fighter Group. 100 times we proved that colored pilots could compete with and defeat the best the Luftwaffe had to offer. It's a milestone that feels both significant and hollow. Significant because it's undeniable proof of our skill and effectiveness. Hollow because it's bought with the lives of men on both sides, with German pilots who had mothers waiting for them too, with red-tail pilots like Marcus who'll never see another sunrise. The bomber crews are calling us their lucky charms now, requesting red-tail escort whenever possible, painting their aircraft to match our distinctive tails. They've seen what we can do, seen how we stay with them through the worst fighting, seen how we've never lost a single bomber under our protection. That zero-loss record is what I'm proudest of, Mama. Not the kills, not the victories, but the fact that every bomber crew we've escorted has made it home alive because we were there watching over them. And the word is spreading beyond just the bomber crews. Intelligence officers are talking about us, command staff is taking notice. Even some of the white fighter groups are starting to show grudging respect. We're not just good anymore, Mama. We're recognized as excellent, as elite, as the fighter group you want covering your back when you're flying into the heart of enemy territory. That recognition, that respect, that's what we've been fighting for alongside the military objectives. But the cost keeps adding up. Marcus is gone. 2 other pilots lost this month. Dozens more with injuries or close calls that could have ended differently with a few inches or a few seconds variation. Every victory has a price, and sometimes I wonder if the price is too high, if proving we're equal is worth the lives of good men who should be home with their families instead of frozen in German fields or floating in the Mediterranean or captured and imprisoned in POW camps where colored prisoners can expect especially harsh treatment. Then I remember why we're here, what we're proving, what it will mean for the next generation if we succeed. And I know we don't have the luxury of giving up or questioning whether it's worth it. We have to see this through, have to build this legacy, have to create opportunities for colored children who aren't even born yet, but who'll grow up in a world changed by what we're doing here in the skies over Europe. Mama, I need you to understand something. Need you to hear words I should have said before but didn't because men aren't supposed to talk about feelings. Because admitting fear or doubt seems like weakness. But flying combat teaches you that life's too short and too uncertain to leave important things unsaid. That tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and the men you love might be gone before you get another chance to tell them what they mean to you. You are the reason I'm alive, Mama. Not just because you gave birth to me, but because you believed in me when nobody else did. Because you sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. Because you showed me what strength looks like when you worked yourself to exhaustion to pay for my education and never once complained about the burden. Every lesson Papa taught me about perseverance and dignity, those were amplified by watching you live those principles every day, watching you maintain grace and hope despite a world designed to break your spirit. When I climb into my cockpit before a mission, when I'm strapping on my parachute and checking my oxygen mask and going through my pre-flight routine, I touch your photograph over my heart, and I draw strength from knowing you're out there believing in me, praying for me, waiting for me to come home. That photograph has seen more combat than most pilots. It's been with me through dozens of missions, through dogfights and flak and emergency landings, through fear and triumph and everything in between. The edges are worn from my touching it. The crease down the middle is permanent now, but your smile is still there giving me courage. I want you to know that if I don't make it back, and Mama, I'm not being morbid, just realistic about the odds we face every time we fly. If I don't make it back, I died doing something that mattered. I died proving that colored men deserve equality, died protecting bomber crews who'll go home to their families, died building a legacy that will outlive me. I died flying, Mama, doing the thing Papa never got to do, living the dream you encouraged when I was a boy with a wooden airplane. That's not a bad way to go, not really. Better than dying in some factory accident or from disease or old age without ever having tested my limits, without ever having known what I was capable of. But I am planning to come home, Mama. Planning to survive this war, to climb out of my Mustang for the last time, to board a ship back to America and eventually a train to Montgomery. Planning to walk through that door you've kept waiting, to feel your arms around me, to sit at that kitchen table and tell you stories about flying that will make you laugh and cry and understand what your son became in the skies over Europe. Planning to use my GI Bill benefits to finish my engineering degree, maybe work in aviation design, contribute to the next generation of aircraft that will be even faster and more capable than the P-51s we fly now. Planning to find a good woman like you, Mama. Someone strong and faithful who understands sacrifice and commitment. Planning to have children, to raise them with the values you taught me, to tell them about their grandmother who made it possible for their father to fly when the world said colored men belonged on the ground. Planning to grow old in an America that's better than the one I left, an America changed by the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen and other colored soldiers who proved their worth in the hardest way possible. The war is winding down, Mama. Germany is collapsing, the Russians pushing from the east, the Americans and British from the west, the Luftwaffe running out of fuel and pilots and aircraft. Our missions are getting easier in some ways, fewer enemy fighters to engage, more targets of opportunity, less organized resistance. But they're also getting more dangerous, because desperation makes men reckless, makes them willing to take chances they wouldn't normally take, makes them fight to the death rather than accepting the inevitable defeat. We're flying into that desperation every day, Mama, into the dying throes of the Third Reich, and we have to stay sharp because a desperate enemy is more dangerous than a confident one. But we're winning. The Red Tails are winning, the Allies are winning, the cause of freedom and democracy is winning over fascism and tyranny. And when it's finally over, when the last shot is fired and the last plane lands, and we can take off our uniforms and return to civilian life, we'll have proven something that can never be unproven, earned something that can never be taken away. We'll have shown that courage isn't determined by skin color, that excellence doesn't respect racial boundaries, that the only limits on what colored Americans can achieve are the artificial ones imposed by prejudice and discrimination. And armed with that proof, armed with the stories of the Tuskegee Airmen and the Red Tails, armed with the undeniable evidence of our combat record, the next generation can fight for civil rights and equality with a weapon their predecessors didn't have, living proof that separate is not equal, that colored folks can do anything white folks can do if given the opportunity. That's the future we're building, Mama. Mission by mission, kill by kill, bomber by bomber brought home safe. That's the legacy that will outlive us all, that will change America slowly but surely, that will give colored children opportunities we never had. And when I think about Marcus and all the others who didn't make it, when I think about the price we've paid and continue to pay, I have to believe it was worth it, that their sacrifice will ripple forward through generations, that their deaths bought something precious, the chance for equality, the possibility of justice, the hope of an America that lives up to its founding ideals. I promise you, Mama, that I'll be careful. Won't take unnecessary risks, won't chase glory or personal records, won't put my own advancement ahead of the mission or my brother's safety. I'll fly smart and stay alive and come home to you when this war finally ends. That's my promise, given with full understanding that some things are beyond my control, that luck and chance play as big a role as skill in determining who survives combat and who doesn't, but given with absolute sincerity nonetheless. And I pray, Mama, pray every morning before I fly and every evening when I land. Pray for strength and courage and skill. Pray for my brothers in the Red Tails and the bomber crews we protect. Pray for the German pilots I fight against because they're human too, with families waiting for them. Pray for you and your health and your safety. Pray that you won't have to receive that telegram. Pray that you'll see your son again and hold him and know that he did his best to honor everything you taught him. Pray for America too. Pray that the country we're fighting for will become the country it claims to be, that the democracy we're defending will extend to all Americans regardless of color, that the freedom we're preserving will include freedom from discrimination and prejudice and the casual cruelty of a system designed to keep colored folks down. Pray that the Tuskegee Airmen's legacy will help push America toward its better angels, toward the ideals in the Constitution that have never quite been fulfilled, but that we keep reaching for generation after generation. The sun's setting over Ramatelli now, Mama, painting the sky in reds and golds that match our tail markings, turning our Mustangs into silhouettes against the fading light. Tomorrow we'll fly again. More missions, more combat, more chances to add to our record and our legacy. But tonight I'm taking time to write you this letter, to tell you I'm alive and thinking of you, to share some of what I've experienced and felt and learned in the skies over Europe. Keep that photograph of me in your Sunday dress pocket, Mama, the one from when I graduated flight training. Keep praying for me and believing in me and waiting for the day I walk through that door and we can finally celebrate together. Celebrate my survival. Celebrate what the Red Tails accomplished. Celebrate the beginning of the changes we set in motion by refusing to accept the limitations others tried to impose on us. I love you more than words can express, Mama. Love you for everything you sacrificed, everything you believed, everything you taught me about dignity and perseverance and never accepting less than I deserved. You made me into a man who could fly, who could fight, who could excel at one of the most demanding professions in the world despite every obstacle society placed in my path. And when I finally come home, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make you proud, trying to be worthy of the faith you've always had in me. Your son, flying higher than hate, Eli Flight Officer Elias J., 332nd Fighter Group, Red Tails, Ramatelli Airfield, Italy, April 15, 1945. They laughed at us, Mama, but they're not laughing anymore. The Red Tails have proven ourselves beyond any doubt, earned respect that can never be taken away, created a legacy that will outlive us all. And every time I climb into Sarah's Pride and take off into that beautiful blue sky where color doesn't matter and only skill determines who survives, I think about you and Papa and all the sacrifices that made this possible. I think about Marcus saying, "Tell Mama I made it high," with his last breath. And I understand that we're all making it high now, Mama. Higher than the clouds, higher than the prejudice, higher than anyone thought colored men could fly. We're making it high, and we're taking the dreams of millions with us. Elias survived the war, flying his final combat mission on April 26, 1945, just days before Germany surrendered. He returned to the United States in August of 1945, stepping off the train in Montgomery to find his mother waiting on the platform, her face aged by worry, but radiant with relief and pride. They held each other without words, because words weren't necessary to communicate what they both felt. Gratitude that he'd survived, pride in what he'd accomplished, understanding of the price he'd paid in friends lost, and innocence shattered. But coming home wasn't the triumph Elias had imagined. He returned to an Alabama still governed by Jim Crow, still enforcing segregation, still treating colored citizens as second class despite their service and sacrifice.
The man who'd flown escort missions over Berlin, who'd shot down enemy fighters and protected American bombers, who'd proven his excellence in the most demanding form of combat. That man couldn't eat in white restaurants, couldn't drink from white water fountains, couldn't vote without facing intimidation and violence. Elias tried to use his GI Bill benefits to complete his engineering degree, but Southern universities refused to admit colored students.
He applied for jobs in aviation, thinking his combat record and pilot's license would open doors, but was told again and again that airlines and aircraft manufacturers didn't hire colored pilots or engineers. The recognition he'd earned in combat, the respect bomber crews had shown him, the excellence that had made the Red Tails legendary. None of it mattered in civilian life, where skin color still determined opportunity. So he took what work he could find, taught mathematics at a colored high school in Montgomery, tried to build a life that had meaning beyond just survival. He married a teacher named Ruth in 1948, had 3 children who grew up hearing stories about their father's wartime service, but also witnessing his quiet frustration at a world that wouldn't let him use his skills. He kept his flight logs and his photographs, and the medal they'd finally given him for his service, kept them in a box in the closet where they wouldn't be daily reminders of what he'd been and what he could no longer be. But the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen grew, slowly at first, but then with increasing momentum. Stories of the Red Tails spread through the colored community, became symbols of what was possible, became evidence that could be used in arguments for civil rights and equality. When the military integrated in 1948 following President Truman's executive order, the Tuskegee Airmen's combat record was cited as proof that segregation in the armed forces was both unjust and unnecessary. When the civil rights movement gained strength in the 1950s and 60s, Elias and his fellow Red Tails were there at marches and demonstrations, living proof that colored Americans had earned their equality through service and sacrifice. Elias lived to see the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, lived to see his children attend integrated schools and universities, lived to see some of the barriers that had limited his life come down for the next generation. He never flew professionally again. That door had closed. But he taught dozens of colored students who went on to become engineers and pilots and aerospace professionals, each one carrying forward a piece of what the Tuskegee Airmen had proven. Sarah, his mother, lived to see him honored. In 1965, at a ceremony recognizing Tuskegee Airmen contributions to the war effort, She stood beside him as he received recognition that was 20 years late, but deeply meaningful nonetheless. She died in 1967 at age 72, and at her funeral, Elias read from the letter he'd written her from Italy, the one about flying higher than hate, and there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Elias died in 2007 at age 86, surrounded by children and grandchildren who'd grown up in an America transformed partly by what he and his fellow Redtails had accomplished. At his funeral, elderly white men showed up, former bomber crew members who'd flown under Redtail protection, who'd never forgotten the colored pilots who'd saved their lives, who'd spent decades telling anyone who'd listen about the excellence and courage of the Tuskegee Airmen. They placed a model P-51 Mustang with red tail markings in his coffin, a tribute to the aircraft and the legacy that had defined his youth and shaped his nation's future. The Tuskegee Airmen's legacy outlived them all. In 2007, just months before Elias died, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal collectively to the Tuskegee Airmen, the highest civilian honor Congress can bestow. In 2012, they were honored at President Obama's inauguration, surviving members standing as symbols of courage and perseverance and the slow but steady progress toward equality. Museums were built, books written, films made, all telling the story of colored pilots who proved their excellence in combat and helped push America toward its better angels. But for Elias, the real legacy was simpler and more personal. It was in the students he'd taught who'd gone on to achieve things he'd been denied. It was in his grandchildren who could dream of being astronauts or airline pilots without facing the barriers he'd encountered. It was in the slowly changing America that still had far to go, but had come further than seemed possible in 1945 when he'd returned from war to a South that refused to acknowledge his humanity despite his service. They laughed at the Tuskegee Airmen at first, said colored men couldn't fly, couldn't fight, couldn't be trusted with the responsibility of aerial combat. But the Redtails proved them wrong. Mission after mission, kill after kill, bomber after bomber, brought home safely under their protection. They earned respect through excellence, broke barriers through competence, changed minds through irrefutable proof of their capabilities. And in doing so, they opened doors that had been closed, created opportunities that hadn't existed, planted seeds of change that would bloom across generations. If this letter moved you, if Elias's courage and the legacy of the Redtails deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and leave your like. Every subscription helps us preserve voices like theirs, voices that must never fade above the clouds. There are thousands more stories untold. Men like Marcus W., who made it high and never came back down. Men like CB, who turned disrespect into victories and proved excellence has no color. Women like Sarah, who sacrificed everything so their sons could fly. Mechanics like RT, who kept the Redtails flying through shortages and neglect. Your support keeps their memory alive. Your subscription ensures the next generation understands that freedom wasn't free, that equality was earned through sacrifice, that the sky opened for colored pilots because brave men refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose. Subscribe. Leave your like. Share this story. And if someone in your family ever served, particularly if they faced discrimination while defending a country that discriminated against them, write their name in the comments. Let's honor them together. The Redtails flew higher than hate, faster than prejudice, with more courage than anyone had the right to demand. They fought 2 wars simultaneously, against fascism abroad and racism at home, and won both through sheer excellence and refusal to accept defeat. Their legacy lives on in every colored pilot, every integrated military unit, every civil rights victory that built on the foundation they laid. Elias J. Marcus, WCBRT Sarah. Their names deserve to be spoken. Their stories deserve to be heard. Their sacrifice, both those who died and those who survived to fight for equality in a country that had denied them dignity, deserves to be honored with understanding, with gratitude, with recognition that they were pioneers who changed the world by refusing to accept the world as it was. Their voices, Our mission, over and out.